All right. Good evening. Very nice to see all of you here this evening. And welcome back to friends who have been here before. Welcome to new guests that are here. Welcome to Emmanuel College and welcome to the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. This is our inaugural event of the fall 2022. Inaugural event of the big event that we've had smaller discussions on all kinds of issues that are going on in the Eastern Mediterranean, including the Italian election, which happened a month ago. And we have all kinds of elections taking place, including Israel next week. So we will follow up on a lot of those and every single person who will receive coming up events. And one of them is a discussion on Israeli elections, which Ambassador Ram. I'm very happy to be here because this is our 5th year of this Institute of Eastern Mediterranean Studies. And the mission of the Institute was to create a research and a study gateway to the Eastern Mediterranean. Over the years, this started as an idea of bringing students to the Eastern Med, which was the wider classroom where the security concerns over the Arab Spring were taking place and the financial crisis of 2009 and beyond. And this idea of bringing students over and moving the classroom of moving students to the Eastern Mediterranean has now blossomed into this institute. And I'm very happy that this is the 5th year of this endeavor. And many of the people that are here are responsible for the success of it. I see students that have gone, alums to the program. I see new students that are here. I see a lot of supporters that are here. And over the years, we've raised a great deal of money, and a lot of it goes to the students. The last 3 years, every single one of our students that went received support. We raised over $305,000 and $105,000 went to the students directly. So I think it's a great achievement, not of mine, but of everybody else. This year we will be running our 4th annual Georgia Dennis Seminar on Diplomacy and Security and Innovation in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's taking place January 5th to the 14th. And again, thanks to the generosity of a number of individuals and organizations, this things come together. So I'm very, very happy, and I'm very touched by the support of everyone. This evening, we have a special discussion. We're starting off with a special discussion on something that has been the point of discussion across the globe, namely Russia and Ukraine. And in the spring semester, we had 2 events. One, a roundtable discussion on the events in Ukraine and Russia, and then we also had a discussion on a presentation, a historical and a political presentation on what's going on in the region. This evening, we have the distinct pleasure of having with us somebody that has been in the negotiations over Ukraine. He has represented the United States, and somebody with a long, distinguished background in American diplomacy. And I'm very, very happy to welcome our guest here. And of course, we have our good friend and diplomat in residence at the Institute, Ambassador Vesko Garcevic, who is also professor of practice over at Boston University. And I say, a good friend because, without Vesko over the last few years, the events that we're doing, they wouldn't have been possible. And I'm very, very grateful. And I see Ambassador Hare in the audience as well, and many colleagues who are in the audience as well. And for that, I'm grateful. I will say a couple of words about Ambassador Volker, who is our guest speaker, and Ambassador Garcevic. And this is just a brief background just to give everybody a little sense of who we're talking about. Ambassador Volker is a leading expert in U.S. foreign and national security policy with over 35 years of experience in a variety of government, academic, and private sector areas. He served as a U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations from 2017 to 2019, and as U.S. ambassador to NATO from 2008 2009. And I think that's what the conversation in the front was, because both ambassadors were in NATO at some point, so they overlap. It was interesting, like listening to that conversation. Ambassador Volker is president and founder of Alliance Strategic Advisors, LLC, which provides strategic advice and services to a diverse range of business clients with interest in Central and Eastern Europe. He has previously served as a director of CG Funds Trust and the Wall Street Fund. He also serves as senior international advisor at BGR Group, which provides government relations, public relations, and business advisory services to a wide array of clients. In June 2020, Ambassador Volker was named the Distinguished Fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis, CEPA. From 2012 to 2019, Ambassador Volker was the founding executive director of the McCain Institute for International Leadership, a part of Arizona State University based in Washington, D.C. He remains a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council, a trustee of the American College of the Mediterranean in Provence, France, a founding member of the American University in Kyiv, a trustee of the Hungary Initiatives Foundation, a member of the GlobSec International Advisory Board, and a member of the International Advisory Board of the U.S. Institute for Peace. He has taught transatlantic relations at the George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs, and is a member of that school's board of advisors. He contributes regularly to public policy debates through op-eds, articles, speeches, and television appearances for a wide variety of outlets. So, I think he knows what he's talking about. We also have with us Ambassador Garcevic. As I said, Vesco Garcevic served as ambassador of Montenegro in Brussels, NATO, and Vienna, Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. He was a Montenegrin ambassador to Austria, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. During his diplomatic career, he held important positions at the challenging political time of dissolution of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia and democratic transition of Montenegro. After Montenegro regained independence in 2006, he served as the first Montenegrin ambassador to Austria and the OSCE. He has outstanding knowledge of multilateral issues, especially in the field of European security. Ambassador Garcevic participated in prestigious international conferences on security, such as the German Marshall Fund, Brussels Forum, Munich Security Conference, and Halifax International Security Forum. With his qualifications, he contributed as the panelist to many conferences and seminars about European security, security of Southeast Europe and Western Balkans. He also participated in many high-level meetings, including NATO summits, UN General Assembly meetings, and ministerial conferences. I think that the biggest thing here, though, is that he is ambassador in residence at the Institute of Eastern Mediterranean. Ambassador Garcevic's area of expertise include multilateral diplomacy, European security, enlargement process in Europe, and the EU enlargement and NATO open door policy, democratic transition in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, the Western Balkans, and diplomacy of small states in global affairs. I would like to ask my colleague and friend, Ambassador Garcevic, to introduce our speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Petros. First of all, I would like to thank you for letting us organize this event and for everybody this evening being with us. I hope that you will enjoy. I'm sure that Ambassador Walker, who is this evening with us, will provide an outstanding insight into what's going, not just what's going on in Ukraine, but American perspective of the situation in that part of Europe, and reflect on how this can affect Eastern Mediterranean, because as you know well, everything is connected, and these two regions are not far from one another. I would also say a couple of words before turning to Ambassador Volker, just to introduce the topic, but my intention is not to appear intelligent and to, to steal the show this evening. Definitely everybody knows that the invasion of Ukraine is a turning point in not just European history, but European security architecture for several reasons. First of all, it puts in question
founding act for mutual relations between NATO and Russia. Then it changes perception of neutrality in Europe with Finland and Sweden joining NATO in the foreseeable future. But not just that. The question is whether anybody can be neutral in front of blatant violation of international norms, Budapest Treaty, Helsinki Charter, Paris Charter, and I can go on and on listing the documents which reinforce territorial integrity and sovereignty of European states. So it is a question of Germany and its approach towards Russia. And finally, this will, I would say, it's a convincing argument for European member states to increase defense spending, something that US has been arguing for now almost 15, forever. So those are just a couple of points that I wanted to outline, but this doesn't exclude others. This is now your time, and looking forward to your presentation, which will be followed, as you know, with Q&A. We will save enough time for you to post questions. Now, looking forward to your thought-provoking comments and questions. Please, is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and Russell, thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for the invitation to be this institute. Stand up so we can see everybody and vice versa. So I want to talk about furniture this time, which is a good thing. What I would do is organize my thoughts into three big points, three baskets, if you will. One of them is, what is the state of play right now? What's going on? Secondly, what are the long-term implications we can begin to derive from this? And thirdly, just to touch on a couple of stray vectors that people always ask about, like China and the US midterms. So we'll come to the stray vectors last. But start off on the state of play. So I've been to spent about a week there in August and then a shorter trip in September. But I've also stayed in very close touch with all of my friends and colleagues and counterparts and so forth in Ukraine. Among the projects that I'm working on, my consulting firm, I'm a founding partner of the American University of Kyiv. The four of us who got together to bring American degree education to Ukraine rather than Ukrainian students going abroad. This is a partnership with Arizona State University. We're accredited southwestern part of the US accreditation. And we opened our doors for students on September 1st of this year. So even as the war is going on, we had been a 3-year plan of where we're going with this. We're beginning our educational venture in digital education, software engineering, global business management. So kind of the hard sciences and the hard business side as the foundation, and then we'll grow laterally from there. And we will introduce liberal arts and international affairs and economics, a few other disciplines over the next couple of years, but that's our starting point. We were able to do this virtually right now because you're not allowed to have large gatherings. But when I went there in September, we actually had a physical meeting of the current students. We had about 100 in the audience and about another 50 joining online. So we had a very good turnout. And all of these students have committed themselves to pursuing higher education, to getting an American university degree. And they're just embarking on this now. So I bring that example up partly because I want to give you a sense that I'm giving you some very current perceptions from having been there, but also to give you a sense of Ukraine is it's a cohesive, determined, resilient place. So as bad as everything is in war, it is nonetheless a place that knows who it is, where it is, what they're doing, and will continue to invest in itself for the future. So the state of play, February 24th of this year, Russia invaded Ukraine for the 3rd time in 8 years. First two were limited invasions. The third one now is a massive invasion, so a different quality to this one. They invaded, depending on how you count, anywhere from 5 to 7 different main vectors of attack into Ukraine, going after all of the major cities, going after Kyiv from the northwest and northeast, going after Sumy and Chernihiv, going after Kharkiv, going after Odessa, going after Mariupol, all trying to converge. And Putin's clearly stated objective, not us supposing. His stated objective was to eliminate Ukraine as a national identity and a people. He doesn't believe Ukraine exists. He believes that it is confused Russians who've been brainwashed by the West, and that they are part of the Russian family. These are lands that should belong to Russia that were unfairly taken away. And just as Peter the Great, literally comparing himself to Peter the Great, Putin said he's going to reacquire these Russian lands that have unfairly been taken away. So that's what he started off to do February 20th. It was a very dicey time for a couple of weeks in Ukraine as they were trying to figure out how is this attack going, how do they defend themselves, who does what. But it quickly became clear that Russia was not prepared for this attack, which is ironic because they're the ones that attacked, but they didn't prepare. And anecdotes from Ukrainians are in abundance. Soldiers who did not know where they were, surprised that people were fighting back when they were, coming into the country. They were shot upon. That surprised them. They only had provisions for 3 days, food and fuel for 3 days. They had no current maps. So I've shown maps that were confiscated from Russian soldiers, which are the Soviet Union maps from the 1980s, the same ones that the head of Ukrainian intelligence used when he was in the Soviet military over 30 years ago. So they had no idea what they were doing. They had terrible logistics, terrible maintenance of equipment, poor communications infrastructure. So they ended up using the Ukrainian cell phone network, which really helps Ukrainians with targeting. Poor command and control. So after planning for 3 days, after a week or two, the Russian forces had all gone down. They didn't have the ability to move forward. They were not withdrawing or just sitting on these roads. And the Ukrainian special forces were able to disable the vehicles in front, start targeting some of the other vehicles behind, and the Russians had to make a withdrawal. So that's kind of the end of the first phase of the war, where Russia failed in Putin's principal objective, which is to eliminate Ukraine. The Russians regrouped and said, okay, well, we're now going to focus on eastern Ukraine, an area called Donbass, which is comprised of 2 provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk province. Russia occupied about half of these 2 provinces since 2014, but they never had all of it. And in the early days of the war, they took more of these provinces. They got very close to the city of Kharkiv, and the Russians then decided that they're going to try to take all of these provinces, these 2, as well as the provinces in the south. And this then would be a part of the new Russia, and they would annex these territories. And so they started these artillery battles in kind of a World War II style war of attrition to see if they could beat the Ukrainians about advance, take these territories and annex them. That didn't work either. The Ukrainians were prepared for this. They had better tactics, better equipment, better morale, and they used this effort by the Russians to allow the Russians to exhaust themselves. So the Russians experienced very high casualties, very high usage of ammunition, very disruptive to the military units so that they could not function easily as units anymore. And Ukrainians allowed them to take some towns so that they could ambush them from sides around the town, which they did in several of a couple of other places. And this then exhausted at that stage the Russians' offensive military capability. And since that time, which was now back in July, the Russians have not been able to advance at all in any meaningful way. You'll see in the news that around the town of Bakhmut, the Russians have made some minor advances. Again, the same tactics from the Ukrainian side. If the Russians want to expend that much effort on something, let them do it. And then gradually back up. And then there'll be a counteroffensive there at some point. So Russia has now exhausted its ability to take territory and its ability even to hold the territory that it's taken. And Ukraine has had major advances pushing back east of Kharkiv into Luhansk province, into Kherson province, and soon likely to take the city of Kherson, so that all of Ukrainian territory west of the Dnieper River will be back in Ukrainian hands again. And Putin really only can resort to bombing cities and civilian infrastructure and civilian settlements, which is what he has been doing for the past few weeks. He's been throwing bombs, unguided munitions, because they have very few guided munitions left, unguided munitions in civilian areas, and using Iranian-made drones in mass quantities to fly into the cities to try to attack the energy infrastructure. And it appears that Putin's tactics now are to try to knock out electricity and heat for Ukrainians for the winter. And Putin said publicly that this is a retaliation for Ukraine presumably blowing up a section of the Kerch Strait Bridge, which connects Russia to Crimea. And that itself is therefore an admission by Putin of war crimes, because he's deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure by his own statement. So that's where they are now. We have been, say this in two ways. First off, Ukraine would not be surviving today as a state without the support provided by the United States and European allies. Well over $15 billion worth of military equipment and support, billions of dollars in aid for the financial stability of the country.
The Ukrainians are the ones on the ground. They're the ones fighting. They're the ones that are keeping the economy going. They're the ones that are showing the spirit. So we provided them with this. So that's an important, fundamental, and positive way.
The other way to put it, however, is that we have been slow and dredging behind the curve every step of the way. And we keep saying what we won't do before we change our minds and do it anyway. And you can come up with a dozen examples of that being the case. The current example of that is air defense. We knew back in April and May that as the Russians now are getting bogged down on lines on the ground, not able to reach Ukrainian cities by ground and takeover, Kharkiv, Odessa, Kyiv, Lviv, then the only thing the Russians can do is throw bombs. And so many people, including me, but many people, a lot of former Cyprus, Breedlove, former Secretary West Clark, former head of the U.S. Army Europe, Ben Hodges, we're all arguing send the Ukrainians better air defenses. This is something that we can do. Other allies know how to do this as well. We think it's there. We're going to need this because that's all Putin's going to be able to do. And now here we are in October, and some of them know. And it's that sort of thing where this could have been protected on 30% of the electricity grid is down right now. Ukrainians are working very hard to get that up, but they need equipment now for the West that's been bombed. So it's harder to do. But that's one of the big things. Another big thing is the need for longer range artillery. We said originally, I'll mention a few of these, no Stinger missiles. We said no howitzers. We said no armor. We said no fighter aircraft. We said no long range artillery. We have now done all of these things except the fighter aircraft, although we're working for Eastern European allies. But on the long range artillery, we set an arbitrary limit of 80 kilometers. So you can fire artillery at the Russians, but only if they're 80 kilometers away or less. I can't explain why. This is the stated explanation is, well, we don't want the Ukrainians to fire into Russian territory and bring the war to Russian. But that explanation makes no sense. Because Ukraine can fire into Russian territory from Kharkiv at a distance of about 35 kilometers. And there are Russian forces in Ukraine more than 80 kilometers away from where Ukrainians can fire from. So they need longer range to actually go after the Russian forces in their territory. And they have been following the US request. Debatable whether it's good or bad, but at least following US request, don't fire into Russian territory, so they're not. But that is something we have still not done, it's given Ukraine the longer range artillery shells that we have in our inventory and could easily give them. Why is this important? What the Ukrainians have done incredibly effectively, what we've given them, is break up the Russian supply lines. If you think about history, Napoleon trying to invade into Russia, Hitler trying to invade into Russia, getting stopped by the Russian winter, and the resilience and determination of Russian people to stop and fight. This is where the Russians, they are the ones that are deployed forward, having to supply their forces in Ukraine, facing the need to give them food and fuel and ammunition, and do that for a deployed force in the field. The Ukrainians, recognizing this, have been destroying those supply lines, ammunition depots, bridges, rail lines, basically making it impossible for Russian forces to sustain themselves and thereby weakening their position. The Ukrainians need to do this at greater distance. They are doing it as much as they can with what we've given them, but they need a greater distance.
There are two other things that are critical to Russian supply that the Ukrainians can't reach without right now. One of them is the naval base in Sevastopol.
This is the principal base by which Russia threatens Black Sea shipping. And in the Western Black Sea, Ukraine can hug the coast of its own territory and then NATO country territory, Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, in order to get out to the Black Sea. But the open waters of the Black Sea are vulnerable to Russian attack. These are international waters, simply the US. 200 years stood for pre-navigation international waters. We're not doing this in Black Sea. You disable this naval facility. The Russian ships would have to go all the way back to the Below Seas, hundreds of miles further to the east, and it would give Ukraine much more of an opportunity to police the Western Black Sea and to open up the port of Odessa, which is a critical. The other long range thing that we get the port straight to the and make sure that that rail line is constructed. The only rail line on that bridge that serves Crimea and southern Russia across southern Ukraine by land, it's only Scotland. And that's something that the Ukrainians are able to disrupt a little bit, but this rail line is critical for supplies. So that's where we are right now. I think what will happen, I'll give you the end of the year and then into next year. You'll see Ukraine retake the western part of Kherson province, the part of the province west of the Dnipro River, including the city of Kherson. You'll see Ukraine take part of Luhansk because they want to demonstrate to the Russians that despite having claimed to annex these four provinces, they don't actually control the territory of all of any of them. That it's all going to be contest. And you're going to see Russia make some gains around Bakhmut and suffer casualties, and then the Ukrainians probably push back. I don't think you're going to see much more than that, other than these bombings going on of Odessa and so forth, which are not militarily significant. They are of human significance. You kill people, you shut off electricity, but they're not going to help Russia with the war. That's what you see now. Over the winter, you'll see that the Russian forces have a harder time taking care of themselves than the Ukrainian forces will. And as you come out of the winter, Russian forces will be in a weak position, and we're going to start losing ground again. And that will be the point at which I think in Russia there starts to be a little bit of questioning what are we going to do about this? This is no longer sustainable. Right now, I think it's going to make it through the winter. But after that, start losing ground again next spring. I think all bets are off. So that's the state of play. So given that, what are the long range conclusions that we can start to draw already? And admittedly, projection forward can always be adjusted by events today, but I think there are some big trends. Number one, Ukraine survives as a sovereign, independent European democracy. Each one of those is significant because before February, most people in the EU would not have started by saying Ukraine is European. They would have said it's corrupt. They would have said it's failed reform. They would have said it's part of the former Soviet Union. So any number of things, but they wouldn't have started off saying it's a European, which now they do. And in fact, the EU offered candidate status to Ukraine just a few weeks ago. Second, Ukraine survives as a democracy and as an independent sovereign state. So Putin will have failed in his objective to eliminate Ukraine. And Ukraine has, this will go into the future. So we will all be dealing with sovereign and independent Ukraine. What the war is about now is figuring out where the borders are. Does Ukraine get all of its territory back, or does it not get all of its territory back? What are the conditions under which the fighting ends? What are the conditions? That's what the war is about now. It's not about Ukraine survival. The second big conclusion is that Russia is and will be a pariah state for as long as Putin is in power and as long as Russian forces are in Ukraine against Ukraine's will. This will be a situation. Russia has committed unspeakable war crimes in Ukraine, very well documented, and backed up on Russian officials' own statements. So we are easily correcting, and I say we meaning the United States, a friend of mine, Ambassador Williamson, is doing this. We, the international community, we, the Ukrainians on the ground, the prosecutor's office, everybody is going out and collecting all of the evidence of what happened, the mass graves, the execution of civilians, the use of rape as a tool of war, killing of children, deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure, disproportionate use of force, command and control systems, orders given what to do, who is in charge of what, including using signals intelligence to get the actual conversations. All of this stuff is being done. And it will be used for prosecutions in the future of war crimes committed by Russia and Ukraine. We don't have everything in place yet. We don't know what legal structure will be the structure of choice for prosecuting crimes. There are flaws in everything that we currently have. Creating something new raises questions about what's the legitimacy of something new. But and you could use Ukrainian law and Ukrainian courts, but that then makes it a Ukrainian issue when it's actually a crime against humanity. So we need it to be broader. So this is to be figured out as how this, but that will happen. And as long as we have all of this evidence and all of this direct accountability to Putin, no one is going to lift sanctions, and no one is going to be sitting down with Putin to negotiate the future of Europe and bringing him back to a community of nations. Russia will be under sanctions and kept at a distance for a very long time.
The third thing, but I won't say the name of the question.
Well, the third thing is that
Europe has begun to recognize
first not only is Ukraine state, but the existence of gray zones on Europe's border,
places that are not quite secure, places that are not quite democratically reformed, places that are not quite developed economically the way they should be as working with the European Union, but actually affecting Europe. I don't think this perception had set in before.
everyone talked about corruption, and the instability, the need of refugees. But the idea that by enforcing the notion that they're not part of us, left a space where that territory is both an invitation to invasion and conflict and producing threats that directly impact European citizens. And if you look at what Putin is doing now, he is waging a kinetic war against Ukrainians in Ukraine, but he has launched an energy war against Europe, an information war against Europe, a price war against Europe, and a refugee war against Europe. And we've seen from this conflict in Ukraine, prices for energy in various parts of Europe go up from anywhere to 3 to 10 times. We've seen over 11 million Ukrainians displaced by war, largest number since World War II populations. About half of them go to Western Europe, or Poland, including Poland and Western Europe, and say the EU. He has shown off and demonstrably shown off some energy supplies to Europe in order to make points, such as hauling up the Nord Stream 2 pipes. And he is trying to use this leverage against Europe to get what he wants in Ukraine. The result of this, I think the EU is finding out that we have to structure. It is not safe to have these gray zones. We need to integrate these economies more closely with Europe. We need the refugees to have a place to go home to. We don't want them to stay in our countries. We should go back to Ukraine. We have to get off Russian oil and gas. It is an unreliable source of energy. And we should accelerate a transition to renewable energy, which is actually now cheaper than electricity provided by oil and gas, thanks to Putin's price war. So Europe is reorienting pretty quickly on some of these big policies. And I do believe that Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova become members of the European Union on a somewhat accelerated pace compared to the pace at which others joined. And Ukraine in particular, because of its resilience and valor in defending democracy, defending freedom in this war, but also because in the reconstruction process, Europe, the United States, and others will bring money to the table, but insist that the regulations and laws are changed to conform with European standards as the money is spent, not down the road somehow, but to make the investment and to get the private sector in to rebuild the economy. You have to make these changes. And I think the Ukrainians are now ready to do it. So that's the future of Europe thing. The fourth one is people talk about security. Visco mentioned Sweden and Finland determining to join NATO. I don't believe that the gray zone works for NATO either. I believe, again, that creates threats.
If Finland and Sweden are telling us that it's not
Safe to be outside of NATO anymore, despite 200 years of Swedish history as a neutral country, or Finland since World War II, they say it's not safe. Honestly, how is it not Ukraine? They still have to be a neutral country. And what's being talked about now is security guarantees separate from NATO, for sure. And helping Ukraine develop the best, most modern, technically efficient military in Europe, kind of like Israel in Europe.
that's what we're talking about, why wouldn't we do
Take it from an American standpoint. If Ukraine wants us to give them a security guarantee that will make sure that no one attacks them, why would the United States do this alone rather than with 30 other countries? Makes no sense. We would want NATO. And secondly, if you're not the United States, if you're the UK and Poland and Lithuania, first of all, what's the credibility of your security guarantee without the United States? And why would you take that risk? And why would Russia think that that's credible? Simply by saying, no, we're sending Russia a signal that we're not committed. So I think that argument and that searching for an alternative doesn't hold up in Europe. The only actual security is what actually works, which is what we've done through NATO and various rounds of NATO enlargement since 1997.
Ukraine is the country that has tried to open the door, and I think will become a member of the NATO. But I do think that Georgia and Moldova is right on the course. There's no reason to leave them behind and have some future problem that we can't anticipate today. We're going to do all of these.
So I think that's a change that applies with NATO. And then the final thing, as a long-term implication, is the Black Sea emerges as a place that we think about. We never talked, go back just 5 years ago, but nobody talked about the Black Sea. We were talking about us. And I never really thought about the Black Sea, but I think if you start to do that, you realize that there is a reason to think of this as a region that matters to the States. First off, we have a number of countries that have territory on the Black Sea coast. Only one of them is Russia. And Russia only has a legal claim to 10% of that coastline. Most of the Black Sea belongs to other countries. And 3 of them are NATO members, Turkey, Bulgaria, and Romania. 2 of them are very close partners, Georgia and Ukraine. Moldova doesn't have a coast, but if you settle the Moldova, it's relevant. There's 3 partner countries there. All of these countries have some similar challenges and similar interests. One of them is freedom of shipping navigation in the Black Sea. So having Russia claim to dominate the Black Sea as a country that has 10% of it is a threat to freedom of shipping, threat to the economy. We've seen the impacts on global food supply. We've seen the impacts on energy. We've seen the impacts on the Ukrainian economy by being bottled up. All of this is a problem for the future as well. So security and freedom of navigation in the Black Sea becomes an issue, and freedom for a number of members. Second is that all of these countries are varying degrees of democracy, except for Russia. Turkey is the one that is, it's a democracy, but and, that's going to be the case for a while. But we do support the protection of the rights and freedom, democratic standards and institutions of these countries. But all of these countries face similar problems of corruption and the influence of money in politics, and needing help in reforming their economies and reforming their political and legal systems to conform to European standards. And so this is an area of, I think, increasing attention and focus of what the European Union and the US need to think about with countries in the Black Sea region. I think we're at 5th now, is this country has been bottled up, or this region has been bottled up, but all of these states have a need to integrate more fully into a global economy. And finding the means of doing that is increasingly important for the economic well-being of these countries. And that puts Turkey in a critical position because of the Bosphorus states and its responsibilities under the Montreal Convention. I would argue that Russia has unilaterally initiated the Montreal Convention by its actions of claiming to close the Black Sea. And I think we should be aligned with Turkey in reestablishing the regime that had been in place and had been effective for everybody. So all of these things come together. And then finally, it brings up again the issue of security, because to pursue governance, democratic development, economic integration, and access to a global economy, all of that has a foundation of security. So we need to think about how we need to be an open, secure environment in the Black Sea. So these are all conclusions: Ukraine, Russia, EU, NATO, Black Sea, that I think already flow from the war in Ukraine. Now, I'm going to just move to the 2 vectors that I think everyone wants to hear something about. One is China. The first thing I always say about China is that China is motivated by Chinese interests. So we always ask the question the wrong way. Is China going to help Russia? Are they going to supply arms to Russia? Are they going to help Russia evade the sanctions? So far, they haven't done any of that. I don't think they will do this. I don't think it's in China's interest to do this. I think that China has its own interests, which are problematic for us, such as they want to absorb Taiwan into the rest of China like they did Hong Kong. They have claims of territory of several states in Southeast Asia. They want to overturn the global liberal economic order. All of these are problems for us, but they're Chinese-driven problems for Chinese reasons. They're not Russian-driven problems. And I think Russia's actually uncomfortable with being put in the same basket as Russia. It views Russia's war on a sovereign state and member of the UN, Ukraine, as illegitimate, whereas it views its desire to reabsorb Taiwan as legitimate. It views Russia's destruction of the target, Ukraine, as part of the process as foolish, because China wants to absorb a rich Taiwan like it did Hungary. It views the abuses committed by Russian forces as counterproductive because it has destroyed any potential legitimacy or international support Russia could have gotten. China doesn't want that. They want to be respected at the end of all this, feared and respected going together in this case, but they don't want to be seen the same way. So they've stayed away from this. And as recently as about a month ago, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization had a meeting in Central Asia. And reportedly, Xi and Modi and Erdogan all told Putin, you have to end the war. This is bad. It's bad for us. You're not getting what you want here. You have to stop. I think that's pretty significant. And a good window on seeing how the Chinese are looking at this. We will have to deal with the long-range Chinese threat to our interests. We shouldn't assume that that's going to accelerate. I would even argue that the war in Ukraine slows down the maturation of that threat, because the Chinese are looking at how this is all unfolding in Ukraine. Ukraine is fought back. Ukraine will survive as a sovereign independent state. Russia will emerge weakened and damaged by this war, and the West is more united. So all of these things are, if China were to do something on Taiwan, none of these would be acceptable outcomes. So I think they're convinced, take your time, you're the rising power, Russia and the United States are declining powers, this will go our way and we'll have to be patient. So I think that's on the Charles. The other question people ask about is U.S. domestic politics, U.S. midterm elections. What was that? And my bottom line is that we have 2 years of consistent U.S. policy in House. So we have a bipartisan majority in both chambers, both the House and the Senate, where people support Ukraine and support sanctions and push back on Russia. And that will be the case no matter who's in charge of these chambers. The Republicans in charge of the House, maybe even the Senate, will be supportive of Ukraine and pushing back on Russia. So will the majority of the Democrats as well. There are fringes in both parties. There is a fringe on the far right, that is the Trump America First one, saying, why do we have to do this? Why are we picking a fight with Russia? Why isn't Europe taking care of this? Why does it cost so much? How long are we going to do this for? Why is it worth it to Americans? All of the negative questions to push back on support. You had the same thing on the left. You had these 30 members of the Progressive Caucus in the House saying that there shouldn't be a war. The Biden administration should negotiate with Putin and have a ceasefire, forgetting that the Ukrainians are the agency here, it's their country. And then they got such blowback even from their own party, they retracted. You have these two fringes on both sides, but even together, I don't believe that they want to come more than 20 to 25% of the House and Senate. You have very strong bipartisan support for continuing this for the next 2 years. I do, however, worry about the presidential election in 24, because here, you never know what's going to happen. Anything can happen. Lots of people will run, but if you have Trump and Biden in a rematch, seems quite possible. I was going to start Trump on a national platform and be pushing, for reducing our support for Ukraine and blaming Biden. And I suspect that you'll have progressive pressure from the Democratic Party on Biden to don't keep arguing for more war, don't keep arguing for more money for Ukraine, do things more at home. So this could be a very ugly So my hope is that 2 years is long enough for the Ukrainians to get their territory back and for the Russians to do something about the situation Putin has put them in, driving the country over a cliff, maybe finding a way to change that trajectory. So we have 2 years. That's the presentation. I hope we addressed.
Thank you. All these communicate today, the super where, friendships. I hope that, yes, I hope that we have something like that. 25 minutes. I have a couple of questions, but, don't worry, I don't for those questions because I'd like to give you a chance to ask questions. Just to sum up, your points. First of all, you were really eloquently speaking about something that we can describe as a escalation paradox in which the West is right now trying to help out Ukraine as much as possible, but at the same time trying not to escalate the crisis to the level of no return, to the point of no return. And we see that every day since the crisis erupted, how big country and European allies, some of them particularly backing Ukraine, but at the same time, as you, as I said, eloquently explained, trying also to not to make a step more the one that they will regret later on. Whether this will be enough, that's another question, because I suppose that you will for the question whether Russia is seriously interested in using nuclear weapons if things don't go well in the spring. Then you described Europe and the West as slow and reactive, not proactive. So though I agree with you, you describe the West as more united than before. My question would be for you to think about, and also hopefully to pose, is how much are Europeans really united, or how long can they endure this? Because we know that Europe have no, some countries in Europe have no such a security culture as US or UK or even France, and they may turn to different type of policies in order to, how to say, or they would prefer different type of policies in order to resolve this crisis. Then you mentioned a couple of points and about what the winter can bring about when it comes to Russia and Russian troops. But I also hear other arguments, not just from Russia and not just from Russia supporting Putin, that Russians may use winter as a buying time strategy to resupply their troops, to reinforce their troops with 300,000 people, to train them, send them to eastern Ukraine, and to regroup troops and to get ready for the spring. And some Russian dissidents, they believe that this is a now strategy for Putin, and they put the question mark: what if this strategy doesn't work in spring? And what is then next move that Putin can make if this strategy doesn't work? Because there is no many moves at the table, no many options at the table left if this doesn't work. So I will stop here. These are not questions, just for people to think about and to pose their questions. Therefore, I don't want you to reply to my comments. Okay, please introduce yourself. And then since I don't know you, some of you I know, some of you I don't know, I can introduce yourself. If I see that there are many of you wishing to pose questions, I will pick 2 or 3 and then turn to Kurt to answer. Who is the first one? I see the gentleman over there. Please introduce yourself.
Ambassador, thank you very much. My name is Dimitri. I'm an attorney here in Boston, but I'm very much interested in the topics that you addressed. But I have the following question. Given the policy of the United States that you have laid out very, very carefully, How do you reconcile that policy with the policy of Turkey, who is a country in NATO, but is not fully aligned with the policy of the United States? And it's sort of kind of, dancing around this issue of being open about criticizing Russia.
Okay, thank you. Just one more, that's one more. If there is one more, I see somebody. Yeah, please.
Kathy Bucher, I'm in sociology. So, we saw Afghanistan crumble in the space of days. And then you saw the Ukraine fight in a way that I think shocked many people. And I'm really curious to hear, as someone who really knows that society and that culture, whether or not you were surprised by the response or whether it was what you expected.
Okay, now we get two questions. If there is one more, but I see, yes, I see one more, okay.
My name is Melanie Murphy. I'm teacher. I don't, Ambassador, I hope you're right, that Putin will be a pariah. I don't feel like your description of the world is the world I'm fearing right now. I don't even feel like after the midterms necessarily our Congress and our Senate will be as supportive of the Ukraine policy. And then I see a Europe filled with populist right-wing nationalists who might not be all on board with making Putin a pariah. Are you right? And am I wrong? I hope so.
Okay, so let's go. So Turkey is a really interesting case right now for so many reasons. First thing is that Erdogan is an autocrat determined to stay in power. So when it comes to things like freedom of journalists or sensible economic policy or the ability of others to organize politically and to have a fair election, this is problematic. And so we're going to have Erdogan, and he's preparing himself for a future election. He has every intention to make sure that he stays in power after that election. So that's a problem in itself. And we can get into a long discussion about the whether there's a connection between the nature of the regime and the nature of the external policies. I believe there is. And I think that's one of the factors. That being said, if you stand in Turkey and you do a little 360-degree looking around the horizon, you see Ukraine, Crimea, Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Central Asia, Iran, Northern Iraq Kurds, Iraq itself, Syria, Assad, Syrian Kurds, Israel, Egypt, Eastern Med, energy issues, and then the rest. Our interests align with Turkish interests in these issues, 95% of the time. Our values in terms of everyone's democracy, those are not the way we think about democracy. But when you think about Turkey's strategic interests, American strategic interests, or Western strategic interests, they're aligned most of the time. We, for several administrations in a row now, have failed to figure out how to disagree with Turkey on some things and work with Turkey on areas where we are disagree. I think the last time we had this was in the Bush administration. And it was the Bush administration that finally it kind of blew up. And it's never gotten put back together. This was the decision we made in Iraq, and the Turks decided they didn't want to support it, and we did it anyway, and it went from there. So that is what I think we need to come back to, is actually trying to get a strategic alignment with Turkey, even though we're going to disagree on some other things. There are a couple of issues here that are particularly relevant. Turkey was instrumental in getting Ukraine in the early phases of the war, drone weapons that helped the Ukrainians stop the Russian weapons. The Bayrak program is very, very important. Second, Turkey has been incredibly outspoken that Crimea belongs to Ukraine. including Erdogan himself recently at the UN General Assembly, saying that Crimea should be returned to self-governance. Turkey also played a critical role in brokering the negotiations with Russia to get the grain shipments out of the desert. This has been a lifeline for Ukrainian agriculture economy and allows them to go through the current harvest at the place at the point. So that's been very helpful. At the same time, they have tried to be home for diplomatic negotiations, and I would say somewhat unconstructive, because there's no pushback on Russia's claims. I think any negotiation has to start with Russia ends the war and withdraws its forces. And if that's not what the Turks are saying, and the others are saying, these negotiations are not going to go anywhere. And the Ukrainians were somewhat circumspect about it. And then I think that we have a misunderstanding of Turkey over the Black Sea. I think it's in our interest that Turkey has kept warships out of the Black Sea during this conflict, because that means we're keeping Russian warships out. There are only 17 Russian naval vessels in the Black Sea fleet. Started off as 20, and the Ukrainians took out 3, and none are coming in from anywhere else. So I think this has actually been constructive. It's prevented Russia from expanding a naval presence in the Black Sea. And yes, it would be nice if NATO were to do more. And I think we should be talking with Turkey about, can we set up a system of escorting commercial vessels in and out of Ukraine, which would reinforce respect for the rules under the Montreal Convention and safety of navigation, freedom of navigation in the Western Black Sea. I think Turkey should have to be talking about that. But it's a very, very tricky. I know it's obvious how to do all this, but I think we're interested in that. Interesting. I agree with you completely, Kathy, on Afghanistan and on Ukraine. I spent a lot of time working on Afghanistan when I was ambassador to NATO, and before that, when I was the principal advisor for Europe, and we were trying to get our European allies to work with us in Afghanistan. Visited there several times. Few friends who have served in the Afghan government and diplomatic corps, and I have to tell you, I actually had a conversation with former ambassador to Afghanistan, Ron Newman, in June of 21. He took a study tour there along with some other people. He's president of the American Academy of Diplomacy and some group there. And so this was when we were already hearing Biden administration talking about withdrawal. My supposition, as someone who had worked on it, said, if we pull out, Afghanistan is going to collapse in a matter of weeks. And I asked Ron, what do you think? And he said, yes, absolutely. And he and the other ambassadors and generals who were on the study tour had meetings afterwards with the administration, State Department, Pentagon, National Security Council, and briefed them on their conclusions that this place is going to collapse if we pull out. And yet we went ahead and did it anyway. And of course, you can always talk about spin. Everybody does spin. But the administration say that nobody told them is completely wrong, because everybody does it, including internal unions. This was predictable. Unpredictable. Ukraine, on the other hand, I have visited Ukraine so many times, and I know so many people. I was there in February of 22 before the Russians invaded. And, I had no doubt that the Ukrainians are going to organize themselves and fight to defend themselves, and they're not just going to give up. I've known Zelensky for 3 years, and I believe to be quite sincere that he wants to save Ukraine. He ran for president, believing that he could save Ukraine from its own demons, its own and hadn't gone well. But when it comes to the future of Ukraine, he would be there to say, yes, we mustn't give up, we will fight. And I'm not at all surprised. I was surprised that we were surprised. How did you not know, having dealt with Ukraine, so many people in the administration, having out of their forces, we started, when I was a special representative, we started giving them lethal weapons to javelin missiles and other things.
And we've been working, and these Ukrainians, I've been out in the front lines with them back in 2017, 18, 19. They're motivated, they're smart, they're trained, they're educated in our military schools. They're, incredible. I mean, they're all like Vikings, they're all big, tough. It's really remarkable to see the Ukrainian military. They take pride in themselves. The country takes pride in the military. They admire the professionalism of the US military. So this is night and day from Afghanistan. So that we would somehow be haunted by the ghosts of Afghanistan and deciding that, oh, well, maybe we shouldn't support Ukrainians if they want to fight back. We were confused by ourselves. And then, Melanie, I think you raise a good point. That we have seen in this country and in many European countries, stronger right-wing nationalist populist movements, including some of them getting elected in office. At the same time, even those movements run aground in the face of public scrutiny, particularly on things like that. And I'll give you an example. About 6 weeks ago, I gave an interview to La Repubblica, which is an Italian newspaper taken over by a group in Turin, which is now center right. It used to be more to the left, and it's now center right. And they deliberately asked me about Russian influence in Ukrainian politics, and if this new government gets elected, will there be a problem? I said, well, look, Russia has tried to influence Italian politics as they have elsewhere, and there is evidence of financing parties, supporting candidates, and we've all seen Berlusconi and Putin jumping it up on Berlusconi's state in Sardinia. And so it says, yes, this is out there. And I think it is something that the new Italian government is going to have to demonstrate that they are supportive of the EU sanctions, support of the European Union, supportive of policies for Ukraine, and so forth. And you would not believe the very next morning, I had phone calls from the diplomatic advisor to now Prime Minister Meloni, to the Senate chairman of the Intelligence Committee of the Italian Parliament, the Italian Senate, and they said, "You're wrong. You're wrong. We support Ukraine. We understand what Russia's doing. We're going to stick with the sanctions. We supported Draghi when he was supplying the $10 to Ukraine, even in opposition. We will continue to do this." So it was very interesting. Not only did they come out swinging and say, "No, we are going to support Ukraine," even from the right, but they were very sensitive to the criticism that they've heard it before. And they've had to decide that, no, we can't get in that position. So we're going to out there. So I do have a lot more optimism that Europe stays the course on this for a couple of years. When you come to the US, as I mentioned, there are things to go on this. But the populists the progressives who put out this letter last Tuesday immediately got blowback and immediately withdrew. And McCarthy, I thought his statement was quite astute, actually. I think he was saying it just right. He knows he has a right-wing fringe that he's going to have some seats in the House. So he has to throw them a bone. So instead of saying we're going to cut aid to Ukraine, he says there's no blank check. Meaning, there has to be accountability, there has to be transparency, there has to be congressional oversight, which is exactly the right solid ground to stand on in order to support Ukraine, not let the right wing undermine it, but give them something that sounds like they're being tough. So I thought he did that quite well. And I'm really not concerned about the House. And I would say that even a new dynamic would come into play if the Republicans take the Senate. Because then Mitch McConnell will be the senior Republican in the town. Mitch has been very strongly supportive of Ukraine and pushing back on Russia. And it'll create a different dynamic where Schumer and the Democrats
do not want to push too hard on supporting Ukraine because they don't want to embarrass the White House. They're all on the same side. So they both want to create a dynamic of Democratic Senate pushing back on the Democratic president. A Republican Senate will not be worried about that dynamic. In fact, they'll like that. They will want to find ways to the White House. And they would be doing it from a perspective of you're not doing enough. And so I think we're good for 2 years. And come back to what I said earlier, after 2 years, I start to work. Because then you'll have presidential election dynamics. The midterm dynamics, the Biden White House, the mainstream Republican House, and mainstream Democratic Senate.
I think that we have time for at least 2 more questions. And let's see. Huh?
You can answer your question.
No, that was my question. For thought.
I didn't.
I can't say others to pose questions. I see one, I see second question. Okay, I see 3. I will correct 3 of you and that will conclude the rest. But I think you have just 5 minutes or 10 minutes to answer. Yes, please.
So I'll be quick. My name is Joe Power. So my question is fairly simple and it kind of weaves into a lot of your responses and actually your great discussion. So whether it be Kathy's point on Afghanistan, whether we were surprised with Ukraine, whether the congressional in the White House can get their act together and thinking about what we're going to do. I kind of go back to the flip-flopping of we're going to give them combat planes, we're going to give them howitzers, that arbitrary limitation on what you can do. So I'm thinking, are we strategic? Are we measured? Are we naive? Or are we inept? Because at the end of the day, when I listen to all those things, I can't figure it out because you always like to think your country's being strategic and they know more than us. So there must be playing the chess game with moves down the road. But then you say, I'm not seeing it because we didn't anticipate these things. Are we measured because we don't want to trip into a bigger conflict with Russia? Are we just naive and we think that, you know what, we're just going to bump along and it'll work out and maybe the world just will follow us, even though we can't follow ourselves, or do we just not know what's going on? And whether that's a spectrum of citizens to the White House to, the State Department or the Department of Defense, it just seems like nobody really has a clear-cut view of the world. So I kind of took everything I heard, and some of the questions, and I boiled it down to those things. And I'd love to have your opinion because you were there.
I think it's a point that's the gentleman over there. Yes.
Yes, Ted Dimitriadis, WNTN Radio, Boston Sub for International Radio. First of all, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm an independent, and this is a bipartisan question, but in your humble opinion, would this war have happened had Donald Trump been in office?
Hi, my name's Brooke White. I'm a student here at Emmanuel for International Relations. So my question is, kind of relates back to the topic of you saying with Afghanistan and Ukraine, the political culture that's there in those countries. I mean, how do you think that can contribute to the possibility of a revolt of the Russian people, Yeah.
And you want me to do more? Those are great questions. Reminds me of an accident that friend and mentor of mine, Dan Fried, used to say, which is still right now. Never assume mouse that incompetence will. I think we have a situation here where maybe the only way to say it is the administration is out farting. They are thinking about, well, what could we react to? And what's enough and what's not too much? And, what's the worst case scenario and how do we prevent that? And they're asking themselves all the wrong questions in this sense. I think the first word you used is strategic. And I would say definitely not strategic. But if it's for strategic, we would be thinking
what is the outcome that is in the best interest of the United States? And what do we do to make sure that that's the outcome of the United States? And then maybe we don't talk about it so much. That will be the strategic. Measured for sure, but not necessarily measured in a political spot. Remember Biden's op-ed in the New York Times was titled, "What We Will Do and What We Won't Do for Ukraine." Why on earth would you telegraph what you want? This makes no sense to me at all. If you're not gonna do it, don't do it. But don't tell the Russians that, by the way, we're not gonna do this. And I think they had in their minds this idea we have to be restraining ourselves somehow so that Putin doesn't go with the nuclear. If you got into the shoes of the Russian military, and into Putin's, to some, most importantly, the last thing they can afford is to widen the war. They are losing to Ukraine. Imagine if they were up against American, or British, Polish, or other NATO country forces in different places. There's no way they could win this, and they know it. So they don't want to widen the war. So we actually have the leverage to push, and they will be the ones that have to think about how to react. And this, on the nuclear side, we didn't talk specifically about it, so let me bring that up. It doesn't achieve a military goal. And the military knows that. Putin's objective is to seize and hold Ukrainian territory. If you use a nuclear weapon, the territory is uninhabitable, and you can't seize and hold it. And you haven't protected your own forces. They do not have the kit to protect their own forces. So they will be damaging their own military and their own population as much as anybody else. In addition to that, the military knows, because we have told them, if you use any nuclear device, there will be devastating consequences for you, the Russian military. And I don't know how specific that has been said to the Russians in private channels, but the public's message has been stopped. And I think the Russian military takes it seriously. So you now have a dynamic where the Russian military has been going to use nuclear. And then if Putin gives the order to do so, this then creates a rift. I think Putin must be worried about this. We saw just yesterday, this is 2 days ago now, on Wednesday, we did a call actually and talking about the world as seen by Putin. And he severely degraded the immediacy of the threat of using the war. He said, no, of course, we would never do that. We would only use it for self-defense, and our doctrine is clear. And he deliberately planned it. Because I think he knows that he might be able to do it if he actually wanted to do it. So how do you describe the role of the administration? Maybe the right word is some combination, at least, unstrategic, or not strategic enough. And maybe could be informed by a little bit more belief in where we need to go as a nation in the world. We do have to shape the norm because otherwise it will shape politics. Okay, sorry to take a long time. Fascinating question. Well, first off, it's an unknowable. So would this war have happened if Trump were president? No one can know the answer. I think that Putin did this war for his own reasons. He stated these reasons clearly. He wants to reestablish the Russian Empire. He does not believe that Ukraine is actually a country of the people. He believes that Russia has a right to these territories and that they should be taking them back. He believes the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. He has already shown that prior to Trump,
was willing to fight and take territory. For example, 20% of Georgia, parts of Donbass, Crimea, parts of Moldova. So he has set out many times in many ways. I want to do this. Now, when I was a special representative, and I met with my Russian counterpart, I got a mandate from Secretary Tillerson to be very clear about what our policy is and what we're trying to do. Policy is not a ceasefire in place at the time. Policy was not a ceasefire in place. Policy was not just implementation of the Minsk agreement, whatever that means. Policy is not to push Ukraine to give something on for them. Policy is for Ukraine to get its turn. And we should use negotiations as a way to find opportunities for how to do that. For instance, Russia doesn't want to pull its forces out and have the Ukrainians just flood in. Why not put in place a UN mandated peacekeeping mission for a period of time to establish security and governance, not under Russian occupation, before you then have local elections and before you then have Ukrainians. The Russians heard all this, took notes, took it back to Moscow, never once engaged seriously on a way to accomplish it. From the beginning, their position was to deny that they were occupying part of Ukraine and not to agree to anything to end that occupation. So for all of these reasons, I think you have to say Putin is determined to do this. Now, would he have done it with Trump as president? I don't know. You could make an argument to say that, well, he thought Trump was his buddy. Why would he defend his buddy? Or you could make an argument to say Trump is incredibly unpredictable. And so maybe it's too dangerous to do this with Trump at the helm. Or you could make an argument that Trump is incompetent, compromised, and in his pocket, something like that. So maybe Putin felt that he could have manipulated the way that he knew he would not. You can argue all these things. I don't think anyone can have an answer to them. But the only answer I think that does matter here is that Putin has an objective of reestablishing the Russian Empire, which he has stated clearly, and that's what we need to do. Revolt inside Russia, that's a good question. There is no mechanism for change in Russia. That's the problem. Democracies have mechanisms to change. I believe that we are seeing in Russia now very severe strains on the system. You can't announce a mobilization of getting more forces into the military and have more people leave the country than you get into the military and think that this is normal. This is clearly evidence that something is wrong in Russia. Now they can't say it because there's not a free information environment. But interestingly, you do see now for the first time people publicly criticizing Putin. Now they are doing it from the far right. They're doing it from a militarist perspective. He's not fighting hard enough, not winning the war. But I think the only reason that's the only criticism is because that's the only criticism that's safe to make in Russia. If you criticize that this is a bad idea to be in this war, or we should end the war, we should go out and get arrested. So I think there's a lot more under the surface of dissatisfaction than what we see. I think that people know, and this gets to one of your questions, so I'll answer one of his questions, which is Russia regrouping and resupplying during the winter. I would be very surprised, very surprised. All these recruits that they're bringing in, they don't have the personal equipment to give them. Flak jackets, helmets, uniforms, boots, sidearms. They're saying, you're in the military now, go to the front. And these people are doing TikTok videos, sending them to their families and saying, we're sleeping outdoors. Everybody has COVID. It's cold. They haven't given me anything here. I've had no training. And now I'm going to the front line. So I don't believe that Russia can correct these problems in the next 3 or 4 months. They don't have the economy. They don't have the supply chains. They don't have because of the sanctions, we go import the things, we can't make the financial transfers, they can't manufacture equipment. Talking about guided missiles or other munitions, they're in sad shape. I think everybody in Russia knows that these problems exist, they're mounting, and Putin is running them over a cliff. What they don't know is how to stop it. And this is where I think there's not much we can do about it. Anything we do or try to do will backfire. But I think the Russian people will not allow this to continue for too long. I say the people, I especially think of the elites. Think of the intelligence services, military, which is really upset, the state-owned enterprises, people in the media. They all know that this is going in the wrong direction. And I think they will look for an opportunity to make a change. If you think about Gorbachev, or you think about Brezhnev, or you think about Khrushchev, all of them were informed that something was changing while they were experiencing a long illness somewhere outside of Moscow. And I suspect that what will happen next year is we will learn that Putin's medical condition has suddenly gotten worse, and he is going to be taking some time in Sochi, and then something's going to change that we'll only learn about later.
Okay, that's happening a lot. Concluding this evening discussion, thank you for your questions. And as I said, for provoking comments, as well as your excellent presentation, Kurt. So really, it was a pleasure having you with us this evening. I hope this is not the end of our relationship. It's between us here in the Institute and you, and that we will have an opportunity to see you in the foreseeable future again with us, because as far as I think, this is going to continue, which means that the series is not over yet. Okay, once again, thank you so much for